Yeah, so let's talk about localizing of lesions in the motor system. So this is based on the principle that every part of the brain and the nervous system has a particular function, and if that function is lost, then we can attribute that loss of function to that part of the brain, and that's called localization of the lesion. So in the motor system, you can have lesions either at the level of the UMN, the upper motor neuron, or lesions at the level of the LMN. So I already spoke about the characteristic features of how a UMN lesion presents and how an LMN lesion presents in the previous video. In this video, we're just going to say how to localize based on clinical findings. So firstly, what all does the UMN include? So like I said in the previous video, the UMN starts from the cortex and ends at the alpha motor neuron, the spinal cord. So from the cortex to the spinal cord. So any lesion in this chain will lead to a UMN type of paralysis, and features of which I have already discussed. So based on exactly where in the UMN, or based on the clinical features, we can also say exactly where in the UMN chain the lesion has occurred. So the UMN includes, once more I reiterate, the motor cortex, the internal capsule, the brainstem, and the spinal cord. So these are the main components of the UMN, and each of these areas will lesions in each of these areas will present differently. So let's just look at it. So we have the motor cortex. So there can be a lesion. One second, yeah. Just give me a second, yeah. Okay, so there can be a lesion at this level. So that will be a lesion at the motor cortex. Then you can have a lesion at this level. That would be at the internal capsule. You can have a lesion at this level. That's a midbrain lesion. You can have a lesion at this level. That's a pontine lesion. At this level, and that's a pontine lesion. And at this level, that's a medulla lesion. So this whole thing is the brainstem, which the UMN passes through. So you can have a lesion at any of these levels, and each of them will present with different features. And you can also have a lesion at this level, at the spinal cord level, and we'll see how each of them present in the next slide. So firstly, let's imagine that the UMN starts in the motor cortex, and so let's assume that the lesion is at the motor cortex. So how does a lesion of a UMN lesion of the motor cortex present? So it presents as a classical monoplegia. So what is monoplegia? A particular part or a particular limb is affected based on the region involved. So a particular function is lost. So I'll give you the idea, you'll get the idea better now. So look at it. So you might have already seen this. This is the motor homunculus, right? This is the motor cortex. So each part of the motor cortex is dedicated to one part. So this region of the motor cortex is controls the motor activities of the hand. This region of the motor cortex controls the motor activities of the foot. So all of this gets blood supply or whatever from different sources. So if this artery is blocked or there's a lesion here, then this part of the motor cortex is affected, right? This part of the motor cortex is affected, and the patient will present with what? Weakness of the foot or lack of motor functioning in the foot, because that part is affected. So that is called monoplegia. So if this is the right motor cortex and the patient has a lesion in this part, and we know the fibers cross over, so this patient will present with weakness of the left foot because it's contralateral. These motor fibers cross over at the level of the pyramid in the medulla. So if in the right cerebral hemisphere or the right motor cortex, the foot region is affected, then the patient will come with weakness in the left foot. Similarly, now you can guess this region is affected, which supplies the motor activity of the hand. So the motor cortex, or the part of the motor cortex which is responsible for the hand, is lost on the right side. So the patient will present with left-handed weakness, right? So lesions of the motor cortex present with monoplegia. Okay, so we come down from the motor cortex. We've seen the corona radiata. Any lesion in the corona radiata presents similar to what is seen in the motor cortex because the fibers are still widespread. Now the fibers all start getting dense, and at the internal capsule you have a dense set of motor fibers. So how does a lesion in the internal capsule present? It presents with a classical dense hemiplegia. So one whole half of the body is lost. So basically all the fibers from the right are going to the left, and all the fibers from the left are going to the right, and somewhere just before they come into the brainstem, there's a dense region called the internal capsule, and the lesion, and suppose on the right side I have a internal capsule lesion. My left half of the body is completely in weakness. The whole left half is affected. So that's how it presents. And another point you can remember for internal capsule, it is uncrossed hemiplegia. So what does that mean? That means the facial nerve weakness or the cranial nerve involvement is on the same side as the rest of the body's involvement. So basically your seventh nerve fibers also cross through the internal capsule. So when the internal capsule is affected, you will have weakness of the right face and the right body. Right face and the right body. And if you can remember a further point, it is a UMN type weakness of the face. A UMN type weakness of the face. We'll get to that later. But as of now, you remember it is a UMN type weakness of the face. So the right half of the face and the right body. So the whole right side or the whole left side is affected. Okay, so there is, in this case, there is uncrossed hemiplegia. And so that is dense hemiplegia on the contralateral side, not the ipsilateral side. So right internal capsule lesion will lead to dense hemiplegia on the left side, and left internal capsule lesions will lead to dense hemiplegia on the right side. Okay, so internal capsule, we finished our motor cortex, we finished the internal capsule. So next we come to the brainstem. So this is where it gets tricky, and this is where I also have to go back and read and brush up on what I know. So the brainstem is a very dense region. It contains a lot of your cranial nerve nuclei, and it contains the fibers. So how will a lesion in the brainstem present? So a brainstem lesion or a lesion at the level, UMN lesion at the level of brainstem, presents with something called a crossed hemiplegia. So the other one was uncrossed and dense hemiplegia. Here you have crossed hemiplegia. So what do you mean by crossed hemiplegia? So crossed, obviously it crosses like this. So you can just imagine that there is facial weakness on one side and hemiplegia on the other side, or the body is weak on the other side. So facial weakness on one side and hemiplegia on the other side. So that is how a brainstem lesion presents. It presents with a crossed hemiplegia, and it not only involves the facial nerve, like I said, because the brainstem has a lot of other cranial nerve nuclei, they could also be involved. But whichever the cranial nerve involved, it will be opposite to the weakness. So if the third cranial nerve is involved, so if the patient has right eye weakness, right extraocular muscle weakness with left side paralysis, then you're thinking about a brainstem lesion. Okay, you're thinking about a brainstem lesion because it's crossed. The cranial nerve involvement is on one side and the paralysis and hemiplegia is on the other side. So that's how you identify a brainstem level lesion. There is crossed hemiplegia. So how do you know at which level of the brainstem this happens? So like I said earlier, the brainstem has 3 levels: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. So how do you know at which level this happened? So this is very easy. We could find out, or we could identify this because of the level of the presence of the cranial nerve nuclei. So we know that the third nerve's nuclei is present in the midbrain. So if there is involvement of the third nerve with hemiplegia, then you assume that it is a midbrain level lesion. Okay, then we come down. The 6th and 7th nerve, the abducens nerve and the facial nerve, are present at the pontine level. So if there is involvement of the face and opposite side of the body, then you know there is a lesion at the level of the pons. And lastly, at the level of the medulla, the 9th and 10th nerve nuclei are present at the level of the medulla. So we know that the lesion is at the level of the medulla when the 9th or the 10th nerve is involved. So you can know that by the absence of gag reflex. Facial nerve, you can identify facial weakness, and third nerve you can identify with ptosis and extraocular muscle weakness. So we can identify even the level of the brainstem involvement just by looking at the features. So always remember, crossed hemiplegia is classical of a brainstem involvement. So that's how you remember. So internal capsule uncrossed and crossed hemiplegia in the lesions of brainstem. So this is just the anatomical locations of the cranial nerves. You can just notice that the third nerve is at the level of the midbrain. So involvement of third nerve involves a lesion at the level of midbrain. The 6th and 7th nerve are at the level of pons. So involvement of the pons with weakness is related to related lesion at the level of pons, and 9 and 10 are coming at the level of medulla. So if their involvement is seen, then it's a medullary lesion. Okay, so we finished motor cortex, we finished the internal capsule, we finished the brainstem. So finally it all comes to the spinal cord, and just before meeting the alpha motor neurons, because from the alpha motor neuron of the spinal cord it becomes the element. So What happens at the level of spinal cord is very easy to remember this, very easy to know this. At the level of lesion, there's element type signs. Below the level of lesion, it's UMN, obviously, because at the level of lesion, you're losing all the alpha motor neuron of that level. So the element is involved at that level. And below the level of lesion, you don't have tracks going anymore because it's transected or it's gone or it's dead or whatever. So the lesions, the spinal cord doesn't go down anymore, and therefore below you have UMN type features. So how do we localize at which level the spinal cord is involved? It's very easy. Usually, since the spinal cord has both sensory and motor together, the lesion of the spinal cord can be more easily identified by the sensory feature. So a particular disc or a particular level innervates a particular part of the skin that is called a dermatome. So based on dermatomal involvement, we can localize the site. Other than that, you can also remember any lesion above the level of C5 is associated with upper limb involvement, and any lesion above the level of T8 is associated with an absent abdominal reflex. So if you see any of these, if you see upper limb involvement, you know the lesion is above C5, and if you see absent abdominal reflex, you know the lesion is above T8, right? Okay. So lastly, element. So we finished UMN, we saw where all the UMN lesions are, and we learned how to localize it to either the motor cortex and which part of the motor cortex, or to the internal capsule and how that happens, and the brainstem and which part of the brainstem, and lastly spinal cord. So the element starts from the, couldn't find a suitable diagram, so I'm just going to try and draw this. The element starts from the alpha motor neuron, and then you have the nerve root coming out, and then you have nerves going and supplying various muscles, right? This is the element. So where all can you have lesions in the element, and how do they present? So firstly, if the alpha motor neuron is involved, or the anterior horn cell or the alpha motor neuron, both are right, is involved, then all of these muscles lose their supply. So that the muscles of that level lose their supply. Next, if the nerve root is involved, then maybe some fibers go before that. So the muscles supplied by that nerve root are involved, or there's weakness only in those muscles. Lastly, the peripheral nerve can be involved. So it is either the anterior horn cell or the peripheral nerve or the nerve root. And if only these peripheral nerves are involved, only these muscles are involved. For example, if the deltoid is supplied by the axillary nerve, so if the axillary nerve is injured, there's weakness for the deltoid. So you know the axillary nerve is the one which is injured. So it's very easy. You can localize backwards. So localizing element lesion is quite easy, and you know that these element lesions present in a certain way with weakness, hypotonia, flaccidity, and loss of reflexes, whereas all the lesions we discussed prior to this will present in that classical UMN style with hypotonia, spasticity, exaggerated reflexes and whatnot, which we've already discussed. So that was about UMN and element. Let's summarize quickly, okay? So you're going to think about this with me. Firstly, there is a lesion in the motor cortex. How does it present? Monoplegia, okay? There is a lesion at the level of the internal capsule. How does it present? Tense hemiplegia or uncrossed hemiplegia, okay? On the opposite side, fibers cross over. There is a lesion at the level of the midbrain. So at the level of the midbrain, there is involvement of the which cranial nerve? The third cranial nerve. So third cranial nerve involvement plus contralateral weakness. Weakness on the other side, and ipsilateral involvement of the cranial nerve, okay? So ipsilateral involvement of the cranial nerve and contralateral involvement of the other side. So how will it present? Suppose patient has a right-sided midbrain lesion. So he'll present with left-sided hemiplegia and right-sided extraocular muscle weakness and ptosis, okay? Right-sided ptosis and extraocular muscle weakness, and left-sided hemiplegia. If the lesion is at the level of pons, it will present with either 6th or 7th cranial nerve features, usually facial weakness, and the inability to LR, so lateral rectus, so inability to abduct the eye, okay? They won't be able to abduct the eye on that side. So if the patient has a right patient has a right pontine lesion, how will he present? He will present with facial weakness on the right side and hemiplegia on the left side, okay? So contralateral weakness and ipsilateral cranial nerve involvement. That's how it is. Lastly, a medullary lesion, the 10th and 9th nerve are involved, along with weakness on the opposite side, contralateral weakness, and that is dense hemiplegia again. That is hemiplegia of that side, complete upper and lower limb, right? Lastly, so we finished lesions at the level of motor cortex, at the level of frontal capsule, at the levels of the midbrain, pons, and medulla, that is the brainstem, and spinal cord lesion. Everything below this will have a UMN type weakness, or UMN features of hypertonia, all that stuff, and anything at this level will have LMN and flaccidity and whatnot. So that is a summary of how you localize lesions in the in the corticospinal tract, or localizing of lesions in the motor system. Just to make things clear, I just added 2 pictures. This is a classical, you can guess it, yeah. It is a uncrossed or a dense hemiplegia seen in internal capsule lesions. Uncrossed or dense hemiplegia seen in internal capsule lesions. And this is a, you can see this, a crossed hemiplegia seen in brainstem lesions. And depending on which level is involved, this looks like a facial weakness. So it could be a pontine lesion. So crossed hemiplegia lesion probably in the pons, right? Okay, so that's it. Thank you.